We're standing on the site of a church which has been here for, we believe, just over 1,000 years. Can't prove it exactly, but we know definitely the priests have been known by name since 1287. The history of the church is a church dedicated to a saint, St Edmund, King and Martyr. St Edmund was an East Anglian saint. He was also king of the Angles over that side of the country. I'll get to a little more of that when we get down to the statue of St Edmund. But this church, we believe, is either the 4th or the 5th on this site. We can't be exact because not many records were kept without great research, and we've done a lot of research. And Hilary Atkins, one of our congregation, was the archivist of Dudley at one time, and she's still researching into that. We do know that several events happened throughout the history of the church, and this church was rebuilt in 1724. We do know that the history of the church has varied over many, many years, according to who wrote the history. And there were great connections with the town. At one point, the town was top church and bottom church and in between. Very few little houses. The town has changed dramatically. I mean, in my lifetime and your lifetime, the town has changed dramatically. But before that, of course, there were little houses back-to-backs everywhere around all the towns, all the town centres. St Edmunds has been here for 1,000 years. How we're talking about the present building today is the fact that in 1646, during the Civil War, the commander of the castle, who was Colonel Leveson, heard that the parliamentarians, the Roundheads, were marching up from Worcester to attack the town. So he decided that there'd be no shelter offered for the opposing army, Cromwell's men. So he decreed that all the houses and anywhere offering shelter should be demolished. Well, in 4 days they demolished all the little houses over there. Bearing in mind the town was nothing like it is now. They demolished all the little houses, and allegedly, and in that book that you've just bought, that wonderful book, it does say, available £5 over there. It does say that St Edmunds was demolished. Well, I have been of the opinion for many, many years, and one of the few people who said no, it wasn't demolished, it was slighted. Because in 4 days there were 300 men in the castle. They couldn't have demolished a building of this size, and it was larger then than it is now. They couldn't have demolished a building of this size, and they would not have wasted their gunpowder on blowing it up because they're frightened of the Roundheads attacking them. So we believe it was demolished, or partly demolished, or slighted. We think that the roof may have been taken off, and we think possibly the side down there. But during the investigations for our tower restoration, we found in the tower itself, above the roof level as it is now, the form of the old roof level. Now, if they demolished it, that wouldn't have been there. And also in 1485, Richard III, you know, he who was under the car park, Richard III heard that there was a great fire in Dudley. The Great Fire of Dudley. London had a great fire, 1666. No one knows about our great fire, 1485. It wasn't as great as London, but some of the church was burnt. So in 1485, Richard sent 60 oaks to Dudley to repair the chancel and the church of St Edmund. We've had some dendrochronology done to determine how old some of the beams are upstairs. Great expense. Remember time? Anyone remember Time Team? Yeah, years ago. That's the way I know that word from. We're all clever, aren't we? Let me say that it cost £750 to have 6 oaks done. So there we are. So you can see why we're selling raffle tickets today. So we're waiting for the dendrochronology results to come back to determine how old some of the beams are, and if those beams were original beams from there and in there still. I mean, some of the beams above here are that thick. We don't know when they're put in, but we'll find out. But some of the beams in the tower are that thick. We think those are probably some of the original ones taken up there. So that was 1485, after the Great Fire of Dudley. You go back and tell everybody there's a Great Fire in Dudley. You tell the kids that, they'll say 1666, Great Fire of London. So that's bringing it down into what is happening at St Edmunds in the year 1724. I can't show you pictures of churches before, but we can talk about the church as it is now. In the tower itself, and our stonemason out there will tell you, some of the brickwork, stonework up there is 1 metre thick, and all chipped out by hand like he's doing out there. And some of it is 1 metre thick. And we think that the bricks were added to the tower afterwards, sort of encasing the original stonework, which is a sensible idea. And that is very interesting because, you know, I shall never hold my head up high if it's proven that the church was demolished and not slighted. So if we can now sort of move forward into the church. We do apologise that there's no toilet, so it won't be too long. We're having new ones put in. If we move into here, a little further down, I can start explaining exactly about what is happening. You'll see various pictures that go around. But in 1815, 1818, top church, which is St Thomas at the top of the hill, bottom church, bottom of the hill, top church, top of the hill, St Thomas's. That was falling down, so they demolished it totally. Now, in those days, every area had got little back-to-backs, thousands of them everywhere. And so they decided that the people of Top Church parish should go to church. In those days, what did you do? In 1815, you probably sort of got up in the morning, you were lucky to have breakfast, you might have had a pint, and the men probably did the same as well, and nothing else to do. So they had to go to church. Because there's so many people who wanted to go to church, they decided to put these balconies in 1815, 1818, to accommodate the overflow of people. When you get round there, you'll see some of the processions from Dudley. You know, there'll be 150 people in the procession from the church. That was typical of the churches then. So they knocked Top Church down, put these balconies in 1815, 1818. Now, before we go any further, let me tell you, personally, I hate them. If I'd got a big hammer, I'd knock them out tomorrow. Oh. Look at the shaping of the archways. How wonderful it is. Yeah. Right? What you can't see unless you go around the other side are the shaping of the windows, following the same design. And there were clear windows in here until those pictures were put in the 19th century, the stained glass window. There were clear windows. How light and bright when the sun comes through, particularly that side on a Sunday morning. It's wonderful. So how light and bright it would be without those balconies. Don't tell the Victorian Society about what I've said. They won't thank you for it. So that's what happened in the part of the history there. The church, the ceiling was lowered, by the way, to bring it down. That was in the 1860s. There was an awful lot of work done in the 19th century by the Victorians, because they loved putting memorials on the wall. Everyone who died was the most wonderful person who ever lived. And because you were a rich Victorian, you had a big plaque on the wall, didn't you? Every church has them. So that's what happened here. This church has been through many changes. These pews were private pews at one time. You paid your rent. You know, number 64, that's about my age. Number 64 was my pew. It wasn't really, I wasn't around that time. So that was your pew. You sat in that pew, your family. Woe betide anybody who wants to get in your pew. It still happens nowadays in some church. You know, you're sitting in my seat. I always sit there. Upstairs, the people have got to sit somewhere, so they put benches in. The benches up there, no backs in them. Oh. You weren't allowed to be comfortable up there. Now, we've got some wonderful pads here, which we think are wonderful to sit on. Can you imagine sitting up there, bare board, nothing at the back? You just sat there, upright. And I'll talk. Goodness me, we don't have much on now. No heating, Phil said. So that is how we go on. And I'm moving around slightly because we keep moving all the time. It's a fluid activation. So these were put in the 19th century by the Victorians. Some of the parts of the pews are 18th century, so they're 1700. A lot of brown work went into the Victorian churches, or the Victorian editions. If I can move you down here, then we can look at the church from another aspect. When they put these balconies in, this pulpit. Now, if the vicar stood there, and one of our former vicars is here today, and you were sitting up there on those horrible benches, you wouldn't have seen him, would you? You wouldn't have seen the vicar, and he wouldn't have seen you. So what they did, they had double-decker pulpits, or even triple-decker pulpits. We don't know about this one. Triple-decker meant there'd been somebody writing the vicar's sermon down, and I can imagine for an hour, they used to preach for an hour in those days. Goodness me, that's penance, isn't it? Can you imagine writing that down? You know, it just wouldn't have happened. But then the curate would be in the next one, and the vicar would be in the top part of the pulpit, double-decker pulpit. Why? Because then he could see you sitting up there, and you could see him. So you couldn't play with your Rubik's Cube in those days, could you? Because the vicar could see everything that was going on. Remember this pulpit, okay? Because I'm now taking you a little bit further. Now you're wondering about that pulpit, aren't you? You're thinking, he's a school teacher. John Davis was vicar of this parish for 33 years. He died in 1869. While he was here before he died, obviously, that was a double-decker pulpit. They decided then to take it down to a single-decker pulpit. And what happened? John Davis had the wood made into a coffin. And he was buried in that coffin, not in the churchyard here. And that is a memorial window to John Davis. We have a picture, a photograph of John Davis. If I can pass it round and have a look. Bearing in mind, it may not have been as stern as that, because when you had photographs taken in those days, you didn't smile. You couldn't smile for 10 minutes, could you? Let's be honest. Unless you were a politician. So John Davis is a fierce man. We did, about 4 years ago, we did one of his 5th generation descendants christening here. So that was rather nice. So that's John Davis's window. This is the John the Baptist window, we call it. There's John the Baptist on the lower level, pointing upwards to Jesus, and remember the way of the Lord, prepare you the way of the Lord, the song, Godspell. Round the edge there, his own self bare our sins in his own body on the tree. That was the text of the sermon by John Davis when he came to St Edmunds first. So they commemorated that when he died, after he died in 1869, which I think is rather interesting. So there's John the Baptist pointing to Jesus, carrying the tree, the wood of the cross. Rather nice story, I think. And, you know, part of the history of the church. Thank you. Gosh, it's lovely, isn't it, really? Oh, I wonder how we would look in those days. We wouldn't be able to afford a photograph, probably, would we? No. So we're moving into that's the nave, this is the chancel, and behind me is the sanctuary of the church. We are having the tower done and paid for by Heritage Lottery predominantly. So we're now in the chancel. Underneath where you're staying were vaults, and down the aisle there were vaults. And then in 1971 they got the tiles up. These are not original tiles. In 1971 they dug up the central aisle to put some more central heating in, and they took the tiles up. And there are vaults all the way down there and underneath here. One of the stones underneath the high altar is to Lady Honour Dudley, 1620. Now that's her gravestone there. When they say they demolished the church, they did not touch below ground level, because no need to. Because if I tell you I've seen the foundations underneath there in the vaults, they are literally that thick. So if you knock a house down even now, you don't dig down and you want to level it over, don't you? So that's the vaults there. Lots of vaults around the church, not accessible at the moment, except about 12 years ago we came to church one Wednesday night, and there was a hole outside the front door to the left, that side there. And one of the vaults, the stones had collapsed into the vault. And you could see the coffins, and you could see the chute from inside the church where the coffins were slid down. And of course the last coffins, they're all mounted on top of each other. It's the Finch vault, it's called, by the way. And we still got some member of the family wants to go down that vault, but no one can go, we can't go down it. And the last coffin has smashed into all the other coffins, and you could actually see the skeletons of a couple of them. And one of them was a child skeleton you could see. So, you know, it's amazing what you don't see and what's in. Like if you go on a tour on a bus somewhere in the city, you walk around the city and see things. But you go around on top of a bus with a tour guide and he'll point things out to you. Like, why did that stone go up there? That one there. Now, as we know, Victorians, the rich Victorians, wanted to show off their wealth. But why on earth that went up there, I do not know. Perhaps he thought he was better than everybody else. Don't ask me what he says, because I've lost the sheet. So that's as it goes. We have had it photographed. Part of the history of the town, of course, is, for some of you remember Cook's, the drapers, the department store in the High Street. They used to come to this church. There's a memorial to Maria, the wife of Samuel. I like how it says draper of this town. He'd been mayor about 15 times, I think. It was the principal store in Dudley, wasn't it? Cook's? Posh place, yeah. So we're now in the chancel and the sanctuary. The window up there is called Christ Pantocrator, which is Christ blessing everyone. Without going too far into it, the various types of churchmanship in all the churches, they're all different, you know, from very evangelical to Anglo-Catholic. And everyone should be proud of what they've got, doesn't matter what they are, whether they be Methodist or anything else. Salvationists, be proud of what you got. Don't stand any nonsense of anybody who attack you. Just don't attack them. This is an Anglo-Catholic church. That window was put in 1928. It's called Christ Pantocrator. The window behind there went all the way down to the level of the wainscoting.